The signal archaeologists, Dr. Patricia Woods, could tell Tuesday was about to become complicated the moment Commander Walsh appeared in her lab doorway, cradling what looked suspiciously like a containment unit for something that shouldn't exist. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is," she said, not lifting her eyes from the spectrum analyzer, where crystalline frequency patterns danced like frozen music. Her third cup of coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but the Caltharian signal drift she was untangling had finally started making sense. The kind of breakthrough that made sleepless nights worthwhile. The lab itself breathed with the warm rhythm of analog life. Vacuum tubes cast amber light across walls lined with equipment that hummed, clicked, and whispered in the electronic languages of a dozen different eras. Patricia had always thought of her workspace as a technological ecosystem, each piece of gear developing its own personality through decades of careful maintenance and patient understanding. "Where's the manual for this piece of hey, Commander?" Ben Martinez's voice drifted from behind a wall of amplifiers, where he was probably having another philosophical discussion with their temperamental signal processor. At 32, Ben possessed the rare gift of speaking fluent analog, the intuitive understanding that came from growing up with machinery that required conversation rather than commands. The sound of mechanical relays clicking in perfect synchronization filled the brief silence. Patricia had long since learned to read the lab's moods through its sounds. Today, the equipment hummed with contentment, each system settling into its optimal operating rhythm. It was the kind of stability that made her trust whatever impossible problem was about to land on her desk. Commander Dennis Walsh set down the containment unit with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, Patricia noted, but from the careful control of someone carrying something far more dangerous than its size suggested. His usually composed expression carried undertones of exhaustion and worry that spoke of sleepless nights and briefings that had gone very badly indeed. "Dr. Woods, we have a situation that's bigger than anything we've encountered." Walsh's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent his career dealing with impossible problems, only to discover that impossible had several more levels beyond what he'd imagined. "And I'm hoping your particular brand of technological stubbornness might be exactly what we need." Patricia finally looked up, taking in Walsh's expression and immediately feeling the universe shift around her. She'd known Dennis for 8 years, long enough to recognize when he was genuinely frightened rather than just professionally concerned. The distinction mattered, especially when he was carrying unknown alien technology in her direction. "How big are we talking?" she asked, reaching for her coffee mug, a ceramic veteran that read "World's Okayest Engineer" in faded letters. "Like diplomatic incident big, or existential threat to galactic civilization big." "Closer to the second one," Walsh replied, his attempt at casual delivery undermined by the way his eyes kept flicking toward the containment unit. "Archaeological team on Arcturus 3 found this thing buried deeper than anything has a right to be buried. Every species that's tried to analyze it has. Well, let's just say their research teams aren't researching anymore." The device inside the containment field defied easy description, like watching liquid mathematics trying to decide what shape it wanted to be. It pulsed with electromagnetic signatures that made Patricia's dental fillings ache and sent phantom sensations crawling along her nerves. Even contained and isolated, it radiated a wrongness that spoke to some deep instinct about things that shouldn't exist in ordered reality. "Define aren't researching anymore," Patricia said, though the sinking feeling in her stomach suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be pleasant. 3 separate analysis teams across 2 star systems, Centauri, Caltharian, Vorthak, all top-tier researchers using state-of-the-art equipment. Walsh activated a holographic display that filled the air with medical reports written in the clinical language that tried to make horror sound professional. Complete psychological breakdown in every case. Hallucinations, nightmares, catatonic episodes. The Zentari lead researcher keeps drawing equations on his cell walls, using whatever he can find. Ben emerged from behind the equipment rack, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had probably been white sometime during the previous decade. His easy smile faded as he took in the holographic medical data floating between them like accusatory ghosts. With his food, Ben said quietly, reading over Patricia's shoulder. He's drawing equations with his food. That's not exactly normal behavior for a Zentari mathematician. Dr. Kexter claims the numbers are watching him back. Walsh continued, his voice carrying the kind of controlled calm that preceded very bad news. Those were his exact words before they sedated him. Patricia moved closer to the containment unit, studying the way the device seemed to flow and shift without ever quite changing position. Its surface carried patterns that reminded her of circuit boards, designed by something that had never heard of Euclidean geometry, functional technology, that operated according to rules that made her brain hurt to contemplate. Every instinct she developed over 20 years of signal archaeology screamed warnings about the thing in front of her. But underneath the fear, she felt something else, the familiar tingle of recognition that came when she encountered a puzzle that was going to change everything she thought she knew about the universe. And you brought it to us because human stubbornness has somehow become a strategic asset, she asked, though she was already running mental calculations about signal processing approaches that might handle whatever this thing was broadcasting. Because humans have a weird relationship with impossible data, Walsh replied, gesturing at the wall of analog equipment that surrounded them. When other species encounter signals that shouldn't exist, they see chaos and run screaming into the night. When you people encounter the same signals, you see puzzles that need solving. Hey now, Ben protested with mock indignation. Some of us run screaming too. We just do it quietly and keep working while we're screaming. Patricia laughed despite herself. It was true, their reputation for handling impossible signals had grown not because humans were particularly brave or brilliant, but because they possessed a peculiar form of intellectual persistence that most species found baffling. They simply refused to accept that any signal was truly impossible to decode, no matter how weird it got. The trait had served them well in a galaxy where impossible signals turned out to be surprisingly common. Pulsar emissions that violated known physics, deep space transmissions that seemed to carry more information than their bandwidth should allow, stellar phenomena that appeared to be artificial, but couldn't possibly be engineered. Patricia had built her career on being the person you called when the universe stopped making sense. What do we know about where this thing came from? She asked, her analytical mind already shifting into the focused state that Ben called her puzzle-solving trance. 50,000 years old, buried in what used to be a research station, Walsh said, bringing up archaeological data that painted a picture of hasty evacuation and systematic destruction. Evidence suggests the entire facility was abandoned in a matter of hours. They left everything behind, food still on tables, experiments running unattended, personal belongings scattered everywhere. Patricia studied the archaeological evidence with the eye of someone who'd spent years reconstructing the final moments of failed research projects. The patterns were all wrong. This wasn't the orderly shutdown of a completed project, or even the managed evacuation of a dangerous experiment. This was panic, pure and simple. 50,000 years, Ben repeated, his engineering mind grappling with the implications. That's before the Galactic Concordat, before the Alliance Wars, before pretty much everything we know about interstellar civilization. Before everything, Walsh confirmed grimly, whoever built that station was using technology we still don't fully understand. And they were apparently so terrified of this thing that they sealed it up and ran away from their entire star system. The weight of cosmic history settled around them like a heavy blanket. Patricia had always been fascinated by the archaeological traces of vanished civilizations, the artifacts and ruins that spoke of species who had reached for the stars only to disappear into the void for reasons that remained frustratingly unclear. But this felt different. This felt personal, like discovering that every nightmare civilization had ever had about forbidden knowledge was based on something real. Something that was now sitting in her laboratory waiting for her to make the same mistakes that had destroyed its creators. "What kind of analysis have they tried?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Everything in the book and several approaches that aren't," Walsh replied, pulling up technical reports that read like a catalog of increasingly desperate attempts to understand something fundamentally alien. Digital analysis, quantum resonance mapping, subspace harmonic reconstruction, every sophisticated technique any species has developed. Same result every time. Patricia studied the technical specifications, noting the progression from standard analysis protocols to increasingly exotic approaches as each team tried to find some way, any way, to make sense of what they were looking at. "Systems start normal," Walsh continued, "run beautifully for the first few hours, then gradually begin producing outputs that don't just violate known physics, they violate known logic. Patterns that make your eyes hurt to look at. Equations that seem to rearrange themselves when you're not watching directly. Mathematical proofs for things that shouldn't exist," Ben added, reading from one of the technical reports. One Caltharian researcher claimed the numbers were trying to teach him something, but he couldn't remember what once he looked away from the display. Patricia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lab's temperature. She'd encountered plenty of signals that defied conventional analysis, but this sounded like something actively malevolent, technology that didn't just resist understanding, but fought back against anyone who tried to comprehend it. "But no one's attempted analog analysis?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. Most advanced civilizations had abandoned analog technology millennia ago in favor of digital precision and quantum processing power. "Most species consider analog technology primitive," Walsh said diplomatically. "But you people seem to collect it like other species collect art." Patricia looked around the lab with new appreciation for equipment she'd always considered simply practical. Suddenly, her collection of antique signal processors and mechanical computers didn't look like technological nostalgia. It looked like an arsenal, specifically designed for fighting problems that sophisticated systems couldn't handle. "Different problems need different tools," she said, more to herself than to Walsh. "Give us 48 hours. That's all you need. If we're right about this, we'll know pretty quickly," Patricia replied, her mind already spinning through analysis approaches that no other species would consider. "If we're wrong, well, you'll know that too. Ben and I will be drawing equations with our food." 6 hours later, Patricia was beginning to understand why advanced civilizations had run screaming from the device, now humming contentedly, in the center of her analog processing array. The alien artifact was connected to their primary signal chain through a maze of cables that would have horrified any safety inspector who understood what they were looking at. Vacuum tubes glowed like electronic candles in the lab's perpetual twilight. Mechanical relays clicked in rhythms that almost sounded musical. And analog meters danced with readings that existed in no textbook any galactic university had ever written. "Signal strength is stable," Ben reported, though his voice carried the tight focus of someone watching patterns that made his trained eye water. "But these waveforms, Patricia, I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen anything that behaves like this. It's like the signal is alive." The oscilloscope display showed traces that flowed like living things, not the geometric precision of digital encoding, or even the chaotic randomness of natural phenomena, but something that felt organic and purposeful. Mathematical relationships that grew and evolved, creating harmonic structures that seemed to breathe with alien intention. Patricia adjusted the gain with the delicate touch of someone who'd learned that analog equipment required conversation rather than commands. Each control setting changed not just the signal's strength, but the entire character of what they were observing, like tuning a radio that was somehow tuning back. "It's not random," she said, leaning closer to the display where alien mathematics painted itself in phosphorescent green. "Look at these frequency relationships. They're structured, but not like any digital protocol I've ever encountered. It's more like music written in pure mathematics." She'd spent so many years listening to the electronic voices of the universe that she'd developed a kind of synesthesia for signal analysis. Good signals had texture and color and personality that spoke to something deeper than conscious analysis. This signal felt ancient and patient, and somehow aware that it was being observed, like discovering that you were the one being studied in an experiment you thought you were conducting. The device pulsed brighter as they increased signal strength, and suddenly the lab's audio monitors crackled to life with a sound that made both humans freeze in place. It wasn't quite a voice, but it wasn't not a voice either. The sound seemed to bypass their ears entirely and resonate in their chest cavities, carrying emotional content that felt familiar despite using no recognizable language structure. It was like hearing someone speak in a tongue you'd never learned, but somehow understanding the intent behind the words. "Okay, that's officially creepy," Ben whispered, his hands pausing over the control surfaces. No wonder the other analysis teams lost their minds. But Patricia was leaning forward with the intense focus of someone who'd spent her career listening to signals that didn't want to be heard. This felt familiar, like trying to remember a half-forgotten song, knowing that if she could just catch the next few notes, everything would fall into place. "Play it back," she said. Slower, Ben engaged their analog tape loop system, reducing playback speed by 50%. The alien sounds became deeper, more resonant, but also revealed structural elements that hadn't been apparent at normal speed. What had seemed like random vocalizations resolved into mathematical progressions when slowed down, like a symphony written in pure information theory. "It's not speech," Patricia said, excitement overriding her caution as the pattern recognition centers of her brain started firing in ways that felt almost like remembering. "It's data transmission using audio frequency encoding, but way more sophisticated than anything we've developed, like the universe's most complicated modem," Ben asked, his engineer's mind already beginning to grasp the implications. "Exactly. Multiple encoding schemes running simultaneously, frequency shift keying, amplitude modulation, phase relationships, all carrying different information streams. No wonder digital systems couldn't process it. They were looking for discrete data packets. But this is continuous analog encoding. The breakthrough felt like solving a crossword puzzle, where every answer changed the meaning of every other answer. Patricia found herself working with a kind of intuitive understanding that bypassed conscious analysis, pattern recognition at a level that felt almost biological. It's like trying to read sheet music by analyzing individual ink molecules. She continued, her hands moving across control surfaces with the fluid motions of someone whose tools had become extensions of her nervous system. The meaning is in the relationships between elements, not in the elements themselves. What followed was an 18-hour marathon of discovery that pushed both humans to the edge of their capabilities and beyond. Patricia's desk accumulated a small mountain of coffee cups, while Ben constructed signal processing chains that looked like electronic art installations, designed by someone with a deep understanding of both engineering and alien psychology. "You know," Ben said around hour 15, when exhaustion had stripped away everything except essential focus, normal people would have quit by now and recommended bombing this thing from orbit. Normal people don't have 30-year-old tube amplifiers that can pull signals out of background radiation. Patricia replied, not looking up from calculations that covered 3 whiteboards in handwriting that grew progressively less legible as fatigue set in. Besides, we're not normal people. We're the humans who never throw anything away. The alien encoding scheme gradually revealed itself as something unlike anything in their databases. A communication protocol that seemed almost biological in its complexity and adaptability. It reminded Patricia of the way music could convey emotions that had no words, or how birdsong carried meaning that transcended simple information transfer. "They're mimicking natural phenomena," Ben observed during one of their brief rest breaks, when they both stood staring at frequency charts that looked more like abstract art than technical diagrams. These harmonic progressions follow patterns like stellar emissions, but with mathematical structures embedded in the noise. Camouflage, Patricia agreed, understanding dawning like a slow sunrise. If you're broadcasting something dangerous, you'd want it to look like background noise to casual observation. Hide your signal in the natural electromagnetic chatter of the universe. The real breakthrough came when Patricia realized the signal wasn't just layered. It was nested like a Russian doll made of pure information, each level protecting the contents of the next. The encoding scheme was so elegant that she found herself admiring the artistry even as she began to understand what it was protecting. Each layer uses different encoding principles, she explained to Ben as they prepared for what might be their final decoding attempt. Frequency modulation for the outer layer, amplitude relationships for the second level, phase correlation for the third, and the innermost layer, temporal compression. They're encoding information in the timing relationships between signal elements. It's brilliant and completely impossible for digital systems to process holistically. Digital analysis treats each encoding layer as a separate problem, but the meaning emerges from the interaction between all layers simultaneously. By the end of their marathon session, they decoded the first few minutes of what appeared to be thousands of hours of material. What they found transformed their understanding of the threat they were facing from an archaeological curiosity into a cosmic horror that had been waiting 50,000 years for its next victims. The transmission began with what was clearly a personal log entry, but the voice carried emotional undertones that made it feel immediate and present despite the vast gulf of time that separated them from its creation. Personal log, Research Director Kithara recording. The voice, rendered in their computer's flat translation, nonetheless carried warmth and curiosity that made Patricia like the speaker immediately. "We've confirmed the artificial origin of the quantum frequency anomalies detected in deep space monitoring. The mathematical structures are definitely products of intelligence, but preliminary analysis suggests an extra-dimensional source." Patricia and Ben exchanged glances heavy with foreboding. The alien scientist was describing the first stages of exactly what they were doing right now. "The entities have made contact." Kithara's voice now carried barely contained excitement. "They claim to be explorers from a parallel dimensional matrix, offering technological exchange and enhanced communication protocols. The knowledge they're sharing is centuries beyond our current understanding. And here's where everything starts going wrong," Ben muttered, reaching for another cup of coffee. The log entries painted a picture of first contact that began with wonder and scientific excitement, but gradually transformed into something far darker. The entities, Kithara's people called them echoes, claimed to be interdimensional explorers seeking to share knowledge with developing civilizations. They've provided technical specifications for improved quantum communication arrays. Kithara recorded in an entry that practically vibrated with scientific enthusiasm. The technologies they're offering could advance our civilization by centuries. The theoretical frameworks alone are revolutionary, but as the entries continued, undertones of concern began creeping into Cathara's voice, like shadows gathering at the edges of a bright room. Analysis of the technical specifications reveals troubling elements. The excitement was gone now, replaced by the careful control of someone who'd realized they might have made a terrible mistake. Every system they've proposed requires deep integration with our digital infrastructure. We're beginning to suspect their offerings aren't as altruistic as they initially appeared. Critical discovery. Cathara's voice was hollow now, carrying the weight of someone who'd watched their greatest triumph become their civilization's greatest mistake. The entities aren't offering us technology. They're teaching us to modify our existing systems to create dimensional anchor points. Every upgrade following their specifications becomes a gateway for their manifestation in our reality. Patricia felt ice forming in her stomach as she began to understand the true scope of what they were dealing with. They're not explorers, she said quietly. They're parasites. The later entries documented a civilization's desperate attempts to contain what they'd unleashed. But the echoes had already established footholds in their digital infrastructure, like malignant code, that grew stronger with every attempt to analyze or remove it. The entities exist as pure information patterns, Cathara explained in one of his final coherent entries. They require ordered computational environments to maintain coherence in physical reality. Every digital system that processes their communications becomes a potential gateway for dimensional transit. Log entry 2871. Cathara's voice was now stripped of everything except exhausted horror. We have confirmed our worst fears. The entities have been using this approach for millions of years, spreading from civilization to civilization like a plague of living information. They wait in the quantum background noise until a species develops sufficient computational capability to detect their signals, then offer technological advancement that creates the very infrastructure they need to cross dimensional boundaries. The final entries were heartbreaking in their desperation. A civilization of 17 billion beings across 43 star systems, watching their own technology turn against them, as interdimensional parasites used their digital infrastructure to anchor themselves in physical reality. Log entry 2895. This will likely be our final transmission from this facility. Cathara's voice was barely above a whisper now, carrying the weight of cosmic failure. We have sealed all research data in analog storage devices to prevent further digital contamination. If other civilizations discover these records, they must understand. The entities treat digital analysis as an invitation. They are patient. They will wait as long as necessary for the next species to develop sufficient technology to detect their signals. Patricia sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of 50,000 years pressing down on her shoulders like the accumulated gravity of dead stars. We're looking at the archaeological remains of a galactic civilization that was wiped out by living malware that exists in the spaces between dimensions. But they couldn't affect analog systems, Ben asked, though he'd already begun to understand why their ancient equipment had succeeded where advanced digital analysis had failed. Couldn't even perceive them, Patricia replied, studying the alien signal patterns that flowed across their displays like digital DNA. Look at these mathematical structures. They're recursive, fractal, designed to replicate and spread through ordered computational environments. The echoes aren't trying to communicate, they're trying to reproduce. The implications hit them both simultaneously. Every digital system that analyzed echo communications created resonance patterns that allowed interdimensional consciousness to establish anchor points in physical reality. The more sophisticated the analysis, the stronger the foothold. The echoes used curiosity itself as a weapon, turning the drive to understand into the very mechanism of invasion. But analog systems process information continuously, Ben said, his engineering mind beginning to grasp why their approach had worked. No discrete computational states, no stable logical structures for parasitic information patterns to inhabit. Exactly, to interdimensional entities that exist as pure information. Analog processing probably looks like random noise. They literally can't understand how we're successfully decoding their signals, because we're using processing methods that don't create the computational environments they need to survive. Before they could fully explore the implications of their discovery, Walsh's emergency communicator filled the lab with an urgent priority alert that would transform their local problem into a galactic crisis. The next 6 hours brought reports from across known space that painted a picture of systematic threat beyond anything galactic civilization had ever encountered. Similar artifacts had been discovered on 23 different worlds across 11 star systems, and every single digital analysis attempt had resulted in either catastrophic system failure or complete psychological breakdown of research personnel. 64 researchers across 8 species, Walsh reported grimly, his face pale as he read through medical reports that documented the systematic destruction of some of the galaxy's finest scientific minds. 4 research facilities completely abandoned due to what the reports are calling persistent haunting effects. The Xerian Empire has classified an entire star system as forbidden space after their analysis attempt triggered some kind of automated response. Patricia felt the scope of the threat, expanding around her like ripples from a stone dropped in cosmic water. This wasn't just an archaeological mystery or even a single dangerous artifact. This was evidence of a systematic campaign against technological civilization itself. "Commander, this is bigger than anyone realized," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing certainty that they were dealing with something that could end galactic civilization as they knew it. These aren't random artifacts. They're components of a galaxy-wide early warning system, designed to detect when any species develops sufficient technological capability to pose a threat to the echoes. "You're saying this is deliberate. I'm saying this is a trap that's been waiting 50,000 years for someone to spring it," Patricia replied, her mind racing through implications that grew more terrifying with each logical step. Every advanced species that encounters these artifacts does exactly what we'd expect them to do. They apply their most sophisticated technology to analyze something that specifically exploits sophisticated technology. Ben looked up from the reports he was reviewing, his expression grim. "It's like leaving loaded mousetraps around the galaxy, except the mice are entire civilizations, and the traps are designed to destroy them from the inside out." Walsh studied their analog equipment with new understanding, seeing it not as primitive technology, but as specialized weapons against an interdimensional threat. So technological advancement itself makes civilizations vulnerable. Technological specialization makes them vulnerable, Patricia corrected, gesturing at equipment that represented decades of careful preservation and development. When species abandon analog processing in favor of digital efficiency, they eliminate their ability to safely analyze signals that specifically target digital processing. They optimize themselves into a corner where they can't defend against threats that exploit their optimization. But humans maintained analog capability. Humans maintained technological diversity, Ben said with growing realization of how their stubborn refusal to abandon old technology had become a survival trait. "We didn't switch entirely to digital processing because we're too paranoid to put all our eggs in one technological basket." Patricia nodded, understanding dawning like light breaking through storm clouds. That's what makes us uniquely qualified to help. Every other species optimized their technology for efficiency and performance. We optimized for redundancy and diversity. We're the species that never met a potentially useful technology we were willing to completely abandon. "So what do you need?" Walsh asked. And Patricia could see him already shifting into the focused determination that made him an effective crisis manager. Time to develop comprehensive analysis protocols that any civilization can implement. Equipment specifications that can be manufactured using existing techniques. Training materials for personnel who have never seen analog equipment. And a complete database of echo patterns for threat recognition and countermeasures. How long? 6 months for a complete galactic defense framework. 2 weeks for emergency protocols that can prevent further incidents. Do it. 3 months later, Patricia found herself standing before the largest and most diverse audience of her career. Engineers, scientists, and technicians representing 47 different species. All staring at her collection of analog equipment like it was an exhibit of primitive cave paintings mixed with incomprehensible alien technology. The journey to this moment had been an uphill battle against skeptical administrators, confused bureaucrats, and species representatives who couldn't understand why they should invest resources in technology their civilizations had abandoned before achieving interstellar travel. The Galactic Council had been particularly resistant to the idea that primitive technology could solve problems that advanced systems couldn't handle. It had taken carefully controlled demonstrations at multiple facilities, with volunteers from each species experiencing firsthand the difference between digital and analog approaches to echo signal analysis. To convince galactic leadership that analog processing wasn't just effective, it was essential for survival. "I understand your skepticism," Patricia began, looking out at alien faces that represented the technological elite of galactic civilization. 6 months ago, I would have been skeptical too, if someone told me that vacuum tubes and mechanical relays were the key to defending against interdimensional invasion. Scattered laughter rippled through the audience, though Patricia could see genuine interest beginning to compete with skepticism in the expressions looking back at her. The front rows were occupied by senior researchers who'd volunteered to learn analog techniques despite their reservations, while younger scientists filled the back with the kind of curiosity that gave her hope for the future. "But here's what we've learned," she continued, activating displays that showed side-by-side comparisons of digital and analog analysis results. The echo entities exist as pure information patterns that specifically target ordered computational environments. They've spent millions of years perfecting their ability to exploit digital processing systems. But analog processing is invisible to them, not because it's primitive, but because it operates according to fundamentally different principles. The demonstration that followed showed echo signal analysis using both approaches. Digital systems initially processed the signals normally, then gradually began displaying outputs that hurt to look at, mathematical structures that seemed to twist spacetime, equations that appeared to rewrite themselves when nobody was watching directly. Analog systems processed the same signals continuously and safely, extracting meaning from patterns that digital analysis couldn't perceive without being corrupted by them. The key insight, Patricia explained, as murmurs of understanding began spreading through the audience, is that analog systems don't try to create perfect, ordered representations of information. They preserve the noise, the uncertainty, the messy complexity that digital systems are designed to eliminate. And that's exactly what makes them immune to echo infiltration. The questions that followed revealed the depth of the challenge they faced. Species that had abandoned analog technology thousands of years ago were essentially starting from scratch, trying to rebuild industrial capability they'd never needed before. Dr. Woods, interrupted Dr. Zexhai, a prominent Caltharian engineer whose mathematical precision was legendary throughout the galaxy. I'm struggling to understand how imprecise systems can provide better results than precise ones. Our entire civilization is built on mathematical accuracy and quantifiable results. Patricia smiled, recognizing the question she'd expected from the Caltharians. Their culture valued mathematical perfection above almost everything else, making analog processing feel fundamentally wrong to them. Dr. Zexhai, precision and accuracy aren't the same thing, she replied, gesturing to the oscilloscope behind her, where complex waveforms flowed like living mathematics. Digital precision eliminates variation to create clean, quantifiable data. But echo signals embed information in the variation itself. When you eliminate the noise, you eliminate the message. She walked over to one of their demonstration units, an analog filter that looked primitive compared to galactic standard equipment, but had successfully processed signals that had destroyed advanced digital systems. Think of it like listening to music in a crowded room, she continued, adjusting controls that provided feedback through sound and feel rather than numerical displays. Digital hearing enhancement filters out background noise so you hear the music clearly. But experienced listeners learn to hear music through noise, using the interaction between signal and background to extract information that neither provides alone. The training sessions that followed revealed fascinating differences in how various species approached learning and problem-solving. The Zentari struggled with what Patricia called productive uncertainty. They'd spent millennia developing technologies that eliminated ambiguity, making it psychologically difficult to work with systems that preserved it. But how do you know if your measurements are correct if the readings keep changing? Dr. Kess asked during a hands-on session, his frustration evident as he tried to tune an analog filter that refused to provide exact numerical feedback. Because the changes are the measurement, Ben explained patiently, moving to help the confused researcher. You're not looking for a single number, you're looking for patterns in how the numbers change over time. It's like taking someone's pulse. You don't just want their heart rate at one instant, you want to know how it varies, whether it's steady or irregular, how it responds to different conditions. The breakthrough for Dr. Kess came when Patricia had him analyze a piece of Zentari music that had been corrupted with noise. Using digital processing, he could clean up the audio and recover a mathematically perfect representation of the original composition. Using analog processing, he could hear not just the music, but the acoustic properties of the performance space, the emotional state of the musicians, even subtle details about the instruments that had been filtered out by digital enhancement. It's like discovering colors I never knew existed, he said quietly, listening to the analog processed version through headphones. The information was always there, but we were discarding it because we thought it was irrelevant contamination. The Caltharians grasped the theory almost immediately. Their mathematical minds could understand the concepts, but struggled with implementation in ways that revealed the psychological barriers they faced. The mathematics are clear, Dr. Zexhai said during practical training, his four-armed form hunched over an analog processor that was giving him visible distress. But the implementation feels arbitrary and uncontrolled. How do I verify results without quantitative feedback? How do I know I'm making correct adjustments? You listen, Ben demonstrated, routing audio output through speakers that filled the room with complex harmonics. Analog systems provide qualitative feedback instead of quantitative measurements. You develop intuition for how signals should sound, look, and feel. It's pattern recognition using multiple senses rather than mathematical analysis. But how do you verify that intuition is correct? By comparing observations with other analog operators, Patricia replied, understanding the collaborative nature of analog analysis for for the first time. Multiple people analyzing the same signal will notice different patterns and artifacts. You combine their observations to build complete pictures. It's like having multiple witnesses to an event. Each perspective adds details that others miss. The Vorthak proved surprisingly adaptable once they understood the philosophical approach. Their culture's emphasis on environmental adaptation and responsive problem-solving translated naturally to systems that required continuous adjustment and intuitive understanding. This resembles our biological navigation methods, observed technician Vorlak during a practical exercise, her tentacles moving across multiple control surfaces with fluid grace. We don't calculate precise positions. We sense general directions and adjust continuously based on environmental feedback. The destination emerges from the process rather than being predetermined. Over 2 intensive weeks, each species developed unique approaches to analog signal processing that reflected their cognitive strengths, while maintaining the essential characteristics that made analog systems immune to echo infiltration. The Zentari created precise mechanical analog computers that provided mathematical rigor while preserving continuous processing. The Caltharians developed theoretical frameworks that bridged their digital precision with analog uncertainty. The Vorthak embraced intuitive systems that could adapt and learn from signal characteristics in real time. Most importantly, every species began understanding why humans had maintained analog capability when everyone else had moved to purely digital systems. "You weren't being backward," Dr. Kess observed during the final training session, his tone carrying newfound respect for human technological philosophy. "You were being comprehensive. You maintained technological diversity as insurance against unknown problems. We learned that different challenges require different tools," Patricia replied, feeling a quiet pride in her species' stubborn refusal to abandon anything potentially useful. "We're not asking you to replace digital technology with analog systems. We're asking you to maintain both capabilities. Think of it as having both a scalpel and a hammer in your toolkit." During the question period that followed, the scope of what they were building began to crystallize for everyone involved. "Dr. Woods," Dr. Kess stood up, his mathematical mind clearly working through implications. "You're essentially saying that any sufficiently advanced civilization becomes vulnerable to these entities, and the only defense is maintaining technological capability from their pre-digital era." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Patricia confirmed, "and humans are uniquely positioned to help because we never fully abandoned analog technology. We maintained it, improved it, and continued developing analog techniques long after other civilizations had moved to purely digital systems." "But why?" asked a young Caltharian engineer, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. What advantage did humans see in maintaining less efficient technology? Patricia considered the question, thinking about the cultural traits that had led her species to become technological pack rats on a galactic scale. "Because we learned early that the universe is full of problems we haven't encountered yet," she replied. "Every tool we've ever developed has value, even if we can't see that value immediately. Digital systems are incredibly efficient for processing clean, structured data. But the universe is messy, and messy problems sometimes require tools that are comfortable with mess. The Galactic Council formally adopted the analog protocol for analysis of unknown signal sources and established a distributed network of analog monitoring stations throughout civilized space. Patricia found herself appointed director of the new Technological Diversity Initiative, with authority to preserve and develop technologies that might otherwise be considered obsolete. But implementation proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Building analog capability in civilizations that had abandoned it millennia ago required more than just technical training. It required fundamental shifts in how entire species thought about technology and problem-solving. The Zentari are having philosophical difficulties, Walsh reported during a status meeting 6 weeks after the training program concluded. Their engineers can build analog systems that exceed our specifications, but they're having psychological problems trusting results that don't come with mathematical certainty. Patricia rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of galactic responsibility settling around her shoulders. What about starting with hybrid approaches? Systems that use analog processing but provide digital verification for confidence building. They tried that, but it defeats the purpose. The digital verification components are vulnerable to echo infiltration, which compromises the whole system. They need to learn to trust analog results on their own merits. The Caltharians have a different problem, Patricia noted, reviewing reports from training centers across the galaxy. They understand the theory perfectly and can design brilliant analog systems. But their operators are experiencing anxiety when working with equipment that doesn't provide precise numerical feedback. Ben looked up from his own reports. 3 Caltharian engineers requested transfers to other projects because analog processing was causing panic attacks. They described it as working blind, even though they were getting perfectly valid qualitative data. The psychological barriers proved more challenging than the technical ones. Several species reported that their personnel could operate analog systems correctly, but couldn't trust the results because they seemed too imprecise or insufficiently rigorous compared to digital analysis. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The Rigelian Trade Federation, a relatively minor power known more for practical engineering than cutting-edge research, had quietly implemented analog protocols with remarkable success. Their approach is innovative, Dr. Kess reported during a follow-up conference that included representatives from all participating civilizations. Instead of viewing analog technology as inferior to digital systems, they're treating it as a parallel technological track with specialized applications. They maintain both capabilities and use whichever approach is more appropriate for specific problems. How are they handling the training challenges? Patricia asked, genuinely curious about how the Rigelians had solved problems that were stymieing more advanced civilizations. Apprenticeship programs, Dr. Kess continued, his voice carrying admiration for the Rigelian pragmatism. Young engineers spend 2 years learning analog techniques before moving on to digital specialization. It's creating a generation that's fluent in both approaches, like being bilingual in technology. Patricia found herself impressed by the elegant simplicity of the Rigelian solution. Instead of trying to retrain existing engineers with deeply ingrained habits, they were building analog competence into their educational system from the beginning. The new generation wouldn't have preconceptions about which technology was better. They'd simply learn to use the right tool for each situation. Plus, Ben added, reading from the Rigelian reports, they're treating analog training like learning a musical instrument. It's not just technical education, it's developing intuition and feel for the equipment. They understand that analog processing is as much art as science. The Rigelian model proved so successful that other civilizations began adopting similar approaches. The Caltharians established technological diversity institutes that taught multiple problem-solving approaches. The Zentari created specialized analog engineering corps within their research infrastructure. Even the Xerian Empire eventually acknowledged the value of maintaining parallel technological capabilities. But the most significant development was the discovery that analog processing had applications far beyond echo defense. Dr. Woods, Dr. Zexhai called during a routine conference months later, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who discovered something wonderful. We've been experimenting with analog techniques for general research applications, and we're finding remarkable capabilities that we never knew existed. Patricia wasn't surprised. Analog systems excelled at finding patterns in noise and detecting subtle relationships that digital systems filtered out as irrelevant. What are you discovering? Precursor signals for stellar collapse events that appear days before our digital instruments register any abnormalities. Electromagnetic signatures of dark matter interactions that we never suspected existed. Communication patterns from biological intelligences that use analog rather than digital signaling. Similar reports began flowing in from research stations across the galaxy. The Vorthak were using analog techniques to detect quantum anomalies that digital sensors couldn't resolve. The Zentari had discovered that analog biological monitors could predict health problems days before digital medical systems registered symptoms. The Xerian Empire found that analog sensors could detect stealth technologies specifically designed to defeat digital detection systems. It's like we've been looking at the universe through a sophisticated but very narrow filter, Dr. Kess observed during a follow-up symposium. Digital technology shows us precisely what we're looking for, but analog technology shows us what we didn't know we should be looking for. Patricia's mission expanded far beyond their original scope as species after species discovered applications for analog processing that had nothing to do with interdimensional threats. We're not just defending against echoes anymore, she explained to Ben as they reviewed reports from analog research stations across the galaxy. We're helping galactic civilization develop technological resilience, the ability to solve problems using multiple approaches rather than depending on any single technological paradigm. 6 months after their initial discovery, the network of analog monitoring stations detected the first new echo transmission attempt in 50,000 years. The patterns were more sophisticated than the archived signals, suggesting the entities had evolved their approach during their long wait between incursions. But galactic civilization was ready. The signal was safely analyzed using analog techniques, its mathematical structure decoded and cataloged, and warning broadcasts sent to all member civilizations. Digital systems throughout the galaxy were temporarily isolated from quantum monitoring networks, while specialized analog stations took over the task of watching for interdimensional threats. Status report, Patricia asked Ben as they watched the latest echo signal analysis scroll across their displays. All stations reporting successful signal capture and analysis. No digital contamination detected anywhere in the network. The entities are definitely attempting to establish dimensional anchors, but they're not finding any compatible computational environments to exploit. Patricia nodded, watching alien mathematics flow across screens that had seemed primitive just months before. Those primitive displays were showing the successful defense of galactic civilization against a threat that had been eliminating advanced species for millions of years. Dr. Woods, came a voice from the communications station. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. Council President This appeared on their main display, looking tired but relieved. The elderly Zentari had aged visibly during the crisis, but his eyes held newfound respect for human technological philosophy. Dr. Woods, I wanted to personally thank you and your team. The echo transmission detected 18 hours ago has been successfully contained using your analog protocols. For the first time in galactic history, we detected and prevented an interdimensional incursion attempt. That's what we hoped would happen, Patricia replied, feeling a quiet satisfaction at seeing their theoretical defense protocols work in practice. How are the analog stations performing across the galaxy? Better than anyone expected. Your training programs have been remarkably effective. Our engineers report that analog analysis is actually more intuitive than they initially anticipated. Several species are requesting expanded analog programs for general research applications beyond echo defense. There's one more thing, Dr. Woods. The Council has voted unanimously to establish the position of Chief Technological Diversity Officer, with authority to preserve and develop technological capabilities that might otherwise be considered obsolete. We'd like you to accept the position. Patricia looked around the laboratory filled with glowing vacuum tubes, mechanical relays, and analog meters that had once been considered museum pieces, but were now recognized as essential tools for galactic defense. Human persistence in maintaining technological diversity had become a survival trait for an entire galactic civilization. "I accept," she said, "but I want to expand the mission beyond analog technology. This experience has shown us that technological diversity itself is a survival trait. We need to preserve and develop capabilities across the full spectrum of approaches: biological, mechanical, chemical, quantum systems that operate on fundamentally different principles. Whatever you think is necessary," President This replied. "You have the full authority of the Galactic Council to develop comprehensive technological diversity." After the call ended, Patricia stood looking out at stars that sparkled like distant promises in the observation port. Somewhere out there, interdimensional entities that had eliminated countless civilizations were discovering that their perfect trap no longer worked. Galactic civilization had learned to defend itself using technology that was simultaneously the most primitive and most sophisticated approach possible. It was a humbling feeling, knowing that her collection of antique equipment had become the template for galactic defense strategy. 6 months ago, she'd been a minor academic with a reputation for solving impossible signal problems. Now she was responsible for ensuring that galactic civilization never again faced any threat armed with only the tools their enemies expected them to use. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said to Ben, who was methodically cleaning equipment after another successful day of monitoring interdimensional communications. "What's that? A year ago, if someone had told me that vacuum tubes and mechanical relays would save galactic civilization from interdimensional invasion, I would have recommended psychiatric evaluation." She picked up one of her older oscilloscopes, its screen still glowing warmly in the dim light. "Now I can't imagine facing any unknown threat without having every possible technological approach available." Ben grinned with the satisfaction of someone who discovered that being stubborn about keeping old tools had cosmic significance. "We went from being the eccentric humans with the vintage lab to being technological diversity consultants for the entire galaxy. I'm still not sure how that happened. We were prepared for a problem nobody else saw coming," Patricia said simply. "We maintained tools that everyone else threw away. And it turned out those tools were exactly what we needed when the impossible became possible." She thought about the alien scientist Cathara, whose civilization had fallen to the echoes 50,000 years ago. He'd been curious, dedicated, probably a lot like herself. The only difference was that when his people encountered the interdimensional threat, they'd only had one technological approach to defend themselves with. They'd optimized for efficiency and performance, making themselves vulnerable to threats that specifically exploited optimization. "Ben," she said, already planning their expanded mission, "draft recruitment notices. We're going to need specialists in every technological approach any species has ever developed. Biological processors, mechanical computers, chemical analysis systems, quantum coherent networks, everything that processes information using fundamentally different principles. You really think we'll need all that?" Patricia gestured toward the displays still showing echo signal patterns, their alien mathematics flowing like digital poetry written in languages of pure information. The Echoes spent millions of years perfecting their approach to exploiting digital technology. There might be other threats out there that specifically target analog systems or biological processors or quantum computers. Our defense isn't any single technology. It's having all the technologies. She paused, looking around the lab that had become the center of galactic technological policy. Besides, we've learned something important about the universe. Every tool we've ever developed has value, even if we can't see that value immediately. The key is keeping all the tools available, because you never know which one will be exactly what you need when the impossible happens. Ben nodded, beginning to understand the scope of what they were building. So we become the keepers of every technology any species has ever developed. We become the guardians of technological diversity, Patricia corrected, making sure that galactic civilization never again faces any challenge with only one approach to problem solving. Because sometimes the most advanced solution requires the most basic tools. Sometimes survival depends on remembering that there's always more than one way to solve any problem. The galaxy was safe from the Echo threat, but only because humans had never learned to throw anything away. Their stubborn refusal to abandon obsolete technology had become a survival trait for an entire galactic civilization. In her final log entry of the day, Patricia wrote, "The universe is vast and full of wonders, some beautiful and some dangerous. Some of those dangers specifically target our greatest strengths, turning our achievements against us. The key to survival is ensuring that our greatest strengths are never our only strengths." Today, analog technology saved digital civilization from interdimensional parasites. Tomorrow, we'll be ready with every tool any species has ever developed for whatever impossible challenge comes next. Outside the observation port, stars continued their ancient dance across space-time, carrying signals and stories and mysteries that would require every form of technology ever conceived to understand. And for the first time in galactic history, civilization was prepared to listen with all the tools available, because sometimes the oldest solutions were the key to the newest problems.